Hello? Okay. Hi, everybody. This is the 3-minute warning for the kids. We need you guys to make sure you guys' areas are clean and then we're going to head out.
All right, everybody. Let's go. It is time. If you are a child or a youth, we're splitting off. So if you can clean up your food stuff and then head over to Jamie if you are in Journey, and upstairs if you are in our space. And we hope you have a great time. Great. So as that happens, the next thing we're going to do is us adults are going to split into our different classes. So can we get Barb Fisk to the front, please? Come on up. You are the winner. You want to come over here? You can explain your class, maybe. Give him a little promo. All right, everybody. This is Barb Fisk, our friend, and she's going to explain to you. I can hand it to you from there. It's no problem. She's going to explain to you what her class is going to be on tonight. So check it out and follow her after this if you'd like to be a part of it.
Should I take it from you? Okay, great. So we are going to discuss trauma, what trauma is, and the adverse effects of trauma. But we're also going to discuss healing within the community. And we're going to discuss that with the perspective of Christian community development.
Thank you. Cool. So that's in the activity center. I think people already went over there. So yeah, head on over. If you're staying in here, we're continuing to talk about the book of Hebrews. So this is the place if that's what you're looking for. And if you want to come closer, you can. So we got the whole dinner style situation. Okay. All right. Looks like it's us for over here. Great to see you all. My name is Erik, and we're going to do our thing, all right? First of all, the first thing we need is a deacon of the microphone. Well, I'm going to ask you all those questions. So we have a live stream going, so there are people joining us online. And so we want them to be able to hear the discussion going on. And so there's a microphone right there. And if you want to volunteer to be the deacon of the microphone, you win special prizes. And those are mostly the respect of Mama Marcia, which is a good prize to have, you know. I seek after it constantly. So to be, just your admiration. So yeah. If anybody wants to do that, you can. Feel free to move the microphone around to whoever, wants to talk. Okay. All right. Oh, yeah, that's fine. That's fine. I don't think so. I think we're just going to have a good time of hanging out. Good discussion. Yeah, I'm here for it. All right, does anybody have... I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on these questions. Does anybody want to share what their favorite, or what their dream pet is? If you could have any animal as a pet, you could domesticate any kind of creature. What would you want to own as a pet? Anybody? You can just shout them out. Mama doesn't want any pets. That's okay too. Jim wants a stuffed animal. I don't think that's a pet, man. I don't know. How about the second one? Okay. Imagine this scenario. That's okay. You get to host the next On Ramps movie night. Bet you didn't know that. What are you having us watch? Do you have a favorite movie that you'd want to share with us? The Goonies? Okay. I like that one. Ooh. I love that idea. Fringoli's cool. I remember that movie really scaring me as a kid. Do you think? I don't know if it would scare me still. I hope not, but I can't make any promises. Anybody else got a favorite movie? It doesn't even have to be appropriate to share with On-Ramps. That was part of the funny aspect of it. Oh, The Mission? Ooh, that's a good one. Let's see, that's got a lot of really good actors. That's got, Robert De Niro? But who's the other guy? Jeremy Irons? Man, yeah, that's a good one. Cool. Those are good. All right. Oh, go for it. Oh, that's sweet. Aw. And they bathe in dirt. You haven't seen the Pixar feature film Chinchilla? It's very good. Yeah. I don't blame you there. All right, so let's start Bible study, huh? And it looks like Jim and Dave, you've nominated yourselves to be the deacon team of the microphone tonight, so you're just the closest to it. Okay, so if you don't already know, we are in the book of Hebrews this year, and this month we're in Hebrews 11. So we're talking about what does the concept of faith in Christianity mean? I feel like we got it twisted in a lot of different ways. We've been talking about how, we tend to think having faith means just sort of like having a good attitude about things or being just like generally optimistic. We called that the good vibes only idea of faith. We talked about faith being kind of just like your beliefs about God in your head, and a little bit about how that's not really what the Bible means when it talks about faith. And we're going to go more into that tonight. But the first thing I want to do tonight is not really read. We're going to listen to the chapter 11 of Hebrews. And I'm going to I got a video of a guy doing like a, dramatic reading of it. And I'm going to see if we can play this. So if I can get it on that screen, I will have really increased my tech skills. So let's see what happens. I don't know. I'm really bad at this. Okay. Bring this over here. I'm like really curious if I do this. Whoa. No, that's weird. This is pretty cool, right? This is like fun to watch. This is why you're here. Nope. Okay, see, now I see it on my screen, but I don't. Hey! Okay. So this is, our friend here is going to be reading the entirety of Hebrews chapter 11, which, if you've been following along, you know that Hebrews is a sermon, which means it was intended to be listened to. Like, it was not intended to be sat down alone and read. It's intended to be heard as an audience. So whenever I talk about the audience of the book of Hebrews, I always say the hearers, like the people who would have heard this as a sermon. So it's always important to keep the genre in mind. We're listening to a sermon. So hearing it like this, I think, might give us a better insight onto this section of Scripture. It wasn't something meant to be kind of like, slowly parsed, sitting in a quiet room. It was meant to be heard amongst a community of people. So we're going to try that today. Okay, let's see. I hope you can hear this. Why aren't you making sound happen? That's cool. No, I think it probably has something to do with the... Hey, do you know that you're speaking? No, I'm sure it has to do with the fact that the HDMI is plugged in there, so... I'm going to read it for you myself. Okay. See, that was a gamble, and we failed. So, we didn't fail. I failed. I apologize. All right. Nope. You can see all my tabs. Okay. So now, take this moment to listen to the whole chapter of Hebrews 11. So remember, this is at the end of the book of Hebrews. The book of Hebrews is this long sermon. It's an argument. It's like not an argument. It's like an argument in the sense of they're not arguing, but he's trying to make a point to this community. This community were ethnically Jewish. They were followers of Jesus. They were experiencing hard times because of some social tensions that were going on, and their temptation was to kind of give up on Jesus and to go back to their synagogue communities. I'm sure their synagogue communities were very nice, but they were increasing tensions between the followers of Jesus and the ones that were not following Jesus. And so the author of Hebrews is using Hebrews 11, finished this whole long section talking about how Jesus is basically bringing in the new covenant. So there's a lot of compare and contrast with what came before that would have been very understood in the minds of the hearers of Hebrews, because they grew up around temples and priests and sacrifices and all this stuff. So it talks about Jesus in terms of all of these things that they would have understood. But also, it's trying to explain why once they have Jesus, they don't need to worry about what they're losing by no longer participating in the system of temple sacrifices and holy days and all the rituals that go along with being in the covenant community of Israel. The author of Hebrews is saying now the new covenant has been established by Jesus, and so your faith in Jesus is the thing that keeps you in the covenant now. So you don't have to be worried that God is not going to be in relationship with you or overlook your sins because you're not coming in every year to practice the right kind of rituals that they would have been used to doing their entire lives. So that would be like a deeply ingrained fear that, like, okay, if I start following Jesus and now I'm like not going to the synagogue every week, is God really going to accept me? Am I going to be, is God going to keep forgiving me and keep wanting to be in relationship with me? And the author of Hebrews is saying the basis of your inclusion in God's community and in what God is doing in the world is now centered around Jesus. And we access that reality by faith, and that's what we're talking about this month. Like, what does faith mean? And so the author of Hebrews here is saying that, like, even the people that you spent your childhood looking up to, the Bible story, the people in the Bible stories, the fathers and mothers of faith, the thing that they have in common is this thing called faith. And so here we're going to hear a little bit about faith, and then we're going to go into what that word means a little bit more. So Hebrews 11 says this: "Now faith is confidence in what we hope for and the assurance about what we do not see. This is what the ancients were commended for. By faith we understand that the universe was formed at God's command, so that what is seen was made out of what was not visible. By faith, Abel brought God a better offering than Cain did. By faith, he was commended as righteous when God spoke well of his offerings. And by faith, Abel still speaks, even though he's dead. By faith, Enoch was taken from this life so that he did not experience death. He could not be found because God had taken him away. For because he was taken, he was commended as one who pleased God. And without faith, it's impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. By faith, Noah, when warned about the things not yet seen, in holy fear built an ark to save his family. By his faith, he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness that is in keeping with faith. By faith, Abraham, when he was called to go to a place he would later receive his inheritance, he obeyed and he went, even though he did not know where he was going. By faith, he made his home in the promised land like a stranger in a foreign country. He lived in tents, as did Isaac and Jacob, who were their heirs with him of the same promise. For he was looking forward to a city with foundations, whose architect and whose builder is God. And by faith, even Sarah, who was past childbearing age, was enabled to bear children because she considered him faithful who made the promise. And so from one man, and he as good as dead, came the descendants as numerous as stars in the sky, as countless as sand on the seashore. All of these people were still living by faith when they died. They did not receive the things promised. They only saw them and welcomed them from a distance, admitting that they were foreigners and strangers on earth. People who say such things show that they are looking forward for a country of their own. If they had been thinking of the country they had left, they would have had an opportunity to return. Instead, they were looking for a better country, a heavenly one. Therefore, God was not ashamed to call them their God, for he has prepared a city for them. By faith, Abraham, when God tested him, offered Isaac as a sacrifice. He who had embraced the promises was about to sacrifice his one and only son, even though God had said to him, "It is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned." Abraham reasoned that God could even raise the dead, and so, in a manner of speaking, he did receive Isaac back from death. By faith, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau in regard to their future. By faith, Jacob, when he was dying, blessed each of Joseph's sons and worshipped as he leaned on the top of his staff. By faith, Joseph, when his end was near, spoke about the exodus of the Israelites from Egypt and gave instructions concerning the burial of his bones. By faith, Moses' parents hid him for 3 months after he was born because they saw he was no ordinary child, and they were not afraid of the king's edict. By faith, Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to be mistreated along with his people, the people of God, rather than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. He regarded disgrace for the sake of Christ as of greater value than the treasures of Egypt, because he was looking ahead to his reward. By faith he left Egypt, not fearing the king's anger. He persevered because he saw him who is invisible. By faith he kept the Passover and the application of blood, so that the destroyer of the firstborn would not touch the firstborn of Israel. By faith the people passed through the Red Sea as on dry land, but when the Egyptians tried to do so, they were drowned. By faith the walls of Jericho fell after the army had marched around them for 7 days. By faith the prostitute Rahab, because she welcomed the spies, was not killed with those who were disobedient. And what more shall I say? I do not have time to tell about Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, about David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, administered justice, and gained what was promised, who shut the mouths of lions, quenched the fury of flames, and escaped the edge of the sword, whose weakness was turned into strength, and who became powerful in battle and routed foreign armies. Women received back their dead, raised to life again. There were others who were tortured, refusing to be released so that they might gain an even better resurrection. Some faced jeers and flogging, and even chains and imprisonment. They were put to death by stoning. They were sawn in two. Ew. They were killed by the sword. They went about in sheepskins and goatskins, destitute, persecuted, and mistreated. The world was not worthy of them. They wandered in deserts and mountains, living in caves and in holes in the ground. These people were all commended for their faith, yet none of them received what had been promised, since God had planned something better for us, so that only together with us would they be made perfect. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. This was Hebrews chapter 11. That was the whole chapter. That's one of the longest chapters in the Bible. Thank you. The guy, though, I was going to have read it did a lot better job, so I'll have to post that in the social media later. So I'd love to hear just what are some of your reflections on hearing that out loud? What are some of the commonalities of the people that are being commended for their faith? What do they have in common? If we were to just use that chapter to try to understand what faith is, what could we discern from what we heard there? And Jim's got the mic, so if anybody wants to raise your hand, he'll bring you the mic and you can talk. What did you hear there? There's a little button at the bottom, and you just press it and hold it. Oh, no. You want to bring it to me? Sorry about that.
One of the things I see here is that Jesus didn't come to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. And that there's no mention here of the Ten Commandments, and I'm not denying the importance of the Ten Commandments, or of other laws or the annual feasts or anything else. And Jesus was saying, that's not what's important. That what's important is to follow God in how we love your neighbor as yourself. And that, you're shaking your head, David? That's not in there either. No, but yeah, it's true. But it's by following God's command of how we are to live and trusting God that takes us, to what Jesus said, that love your neighbor as yourself, which is how he is fulfilling the law. Okay.
Right. We have confirmation. Yeah, that's good. So it was what these people, it was what they were doing. Like, it was the promise that God had given that was prompting them to act in some kind of way. Let's see, in Abel's case, it was to make a sacrifice. In Abraham's case, it was to leave the city that he'd grown up in. But it's always kind of striking out into the unknown. They always did stuff, yeah. Yeah, no one, it doesn't say of anyone here, like, he was commended for his faith because he just had perfect theology. His theology was so perfect that God swooped him up into the air and took him to heaven. All right, Jessica's requesting the microphone. Why don't you just hold on to it, No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, one thing I noticed is people making like intentional decisions that have a lot of risk behind them. And so I feel like in all those stories, they're like people come to a crossroads and they're going to decide, do I do this thing or do I do this thing? And a lot of them are choosing the riskier option, and they're choosing it because of that by faith phrase. So they're choosing to like do the riskier thing or do the dangerous thing.
Yeah, that's good. That's real good. Okay. Any other thoughts? Grandpa Dave, yeah, go ahead. And then, did I see a hand over here? Hi. Mama Marcia, did you raise your hand? Oh, okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Hello. I got a question. At this point, you said this is like a guy reading this to a group of people, correct? Has Jesus been crucified yet? Or has it already happened?
Yes. Okay. So the backstory of this, yes, this book was probably written between, scholars disagree, but I think it's like after 70 AD, sometime shortly after the year 70. So,
Okay.
Jesus was crucified, 30, 35, 40, something like that. And then, basically like the early church was all the writings of the early church are like from the 40s to the 90s, basically.
Gotcha.
So it's like the decades after that. But yeah, these are all Christian churches. These are all, and the interesting thing, one of the core tensions in the book of Hebrews is that there's not a clear distinction between what we would call today Judaism and what we would call today Christianity. All the people that are being addressed in this book have been religiously and culturally Jewish their entire lives, but they were living as immigrants in the kind of Greek and Roman world. So they were a part of a diaspora community, and so holding on to their traditions were really important to them. Like all diaspora communities, like they find their sense of identity in holding on to the traditions of their homeland, But as the following of Jesus came on the scene, it was causing kind of social tension in those communities because, Jesus was Jewish. He can't, like all the early followers of Jesus were Jewish. And as it was moving into the kind of non-Jewish world, it was creating these tensions, right? The Roman Empire basically had like an exemption for Jews to be able to practice their religion because the empire was like, your religion is ancient, so it's probably cool. But following Jesus was no. He was a criminal that was crucified by the Romans. And so the Romans hated the idea of people worshiping Jesus. And so, because he was basically to them like an anarchist or something, And so Jewish people who were in the synagogue were protected from persecution, but Christians were not. And so it was in the interests of these synagogue communities to kind of push out the ones who were following Jesus, but also at the same time, it was kind of like in their own self-interest to kind of purge their communities of the people following Jesus because it could bring persecution from the state onto them. And so also, there's just kind of like some internal tensions between the people who want to follow Jesus. The early Christian communities were becoming these like multi-ethnic communities where Jews and Gentiles were worshiping together. And, that was not looked favorably upon. So it was all these things that were kind of forcing this split between like the Jewish practice and the synagogue communities, and then those, whether they were Gentiles or Jews, that wanted to follow Jesus. So there's this increasing split, but it wasn't fully separated at that point. There wasn't what we would think of as Judaism and Christianity as like two totally separate religions. They were making their way towards that split, but I think it wasn't clearly defined at that point. Does that make sense? Oh, go ahead, please. Oh, we'll bring you the microphone. I can repeat it if you'd like. We have friends that can't join us in person, so.
Okay. All righty. Well, I've read this part of Hebrews many times, and I'm hearing it, and each verse says by faith, by faith, by faith, and when I think about the stories, and we've heard the stories, and I'm thinking, okay, by faith. And these people had a right now faith. It was a right then faith. When the children of Israel, were going through the Red Sea, that faith was for right then, that the sea was going to part. Okay? And when I think about, just that faith, that right now faith, and just knowing that, okay, we're going to do this and it's going to happen. And so I kind of reflected on myself about my right now faith, and the very end says that they didn't see the promise. The promise was the Messiah. We know that. Okay. But that faith that kept them going, step by step. And so it made me reflect on my right now faith. Do I have that right now faith? I have the faith that I'm going to see Jesus. But life happens, and do we have that right now faith that says, okay, I'm going to lean into the Lord for right now? So that really hit me.
That's a really important aspect of our faith, right? Because we can't have faith in the past or the future because neither of those exist, right? Like the only thing that exists is right now. And so if we're going to have faith, it's got to be here and now. It's got to be embodied. But at the same time, there is like a tension in the text, right? Because at the same time, it says they were promised something that they didn't even see in their lifetime, but they still live by faith. And so there's kind of this, sometimes we call it like an already and a not yet. So there's like those two sides of faith. And that always in our life of faith, we're like living into the kingdom. We're getting a taste of it. That's one way we could think about this. Faith is the reality of what we hope for. It's like faith is experiencing a taste of what God has to come for us, but not like experiencing it fully, but living by what we've seen, Like living into a future that has not materialized yet, but that we believe that God has promised. And ultimately, that promise is the promise that Jesus has, the promise of resurrection, the promise of a new world, a promise of the coming of the kingdom of God. All of these things, I think, are pointing to the same reality. But yeah, so it's already, but it's also not yet. Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. I'm thinking about several things I'm hearing, and they really kind of connect with me. Jessica really hit the nail on the head about how risk is involved in these things and action. And I was on this is more like a story that I think comes to this. I was on the phone today with a really close friend that we've had for many, many years. She, like me and like Wendy and me, is retired, but she's really, really active. She works in palliative care, which means that she works with people who are dying, and a lot of similar kinds of settings. She's one of those kind of trained people, trains nurses and things like that. That was her job. So I was talking about some crisis experiences that that I'm engaged in right now, that I'm just sort of part of trying to resolve a sort of crisis. And she said, "Look, I'm going to pray about that, but she said I think you should look for the risk. Look for the risk, because doing the right thing usually has to do with the difficult path, not the easy one." And she said, "That seems to be Jesus' way. That seems to be Jesus' way." So I said, "Well, what's teaching you that right now?" And she said, "Well, I'm just coming to talk with you after spending the last 3 hours with a suicidal person." And, she said, the right thing is the difficult path very often. That is the Jesus way. It involves risk.
Yeah.
And I think this community you're talking about was right on the edge of that. To move forward, they were going to have to adopt some risks.
Absolutely.
And they knew what they were, but they weren't, they were at that point of trying to decide, am I going to adopt this risk, or am I going to stay here where it's safe?
That's good. Can we bring that over to Mom Marcia, and then we'll bring back to you, Jim? Thank you.
I was thinking about what Grandpa Dave just said about risking, and it's a risk to trust God, and but we trust Him because He's dependable, and the people of old, they had to trust God. They didn't have nothing else to go by, So, and in fact, I just posted something, I think it was either this morning or yesterday morning, about the risk of trusting God. It's because a lot of times, because of the way the people were in the Old Testament, how the leader goes, so goes the people, and sometimes they didn't have a leader. And so they were just running amok with things, and those people, like Moses, they had to risk their lives, in order to walk in the way that God had them to go. But then I think about today, one of the verses in this text, 11:6, where it talks about it's impossible to please God without faith. It's just impossible, and then it goes on to say, but He's a rewarder of those who diligently seek Him. And so we know those of old, they had to seek Him with everything they had inside of them, even when everybody else was doing what they wanted to do,
I think you said something a few weeks back, which I think is so important in the context of this. It was written after the temple was destroyed.
Mm-hmm.
And as you look at all of this, in nowhere does our faith depend on the temple or the building or
right.
the particular ceremonies in keeping, the Passover and the other things. That has to do with faith and living and trusting God.
Right. But it's not also, it doesn't mean that it's totally inside our heads either, as if it's like, it's not the material things you do, because every example of faith that was in there was like people doing things, you know? So there's definitely like concrete action involved in faith, but it's just not mediated through the temple and stuff. And I mean, Hebrews basically like 1 through 10 is all about that. Dan, hi, welcome.
Hi, nice to see you. Is this on? Are we good?
Go for it.
I just think it's bonkers that Joseph is like, hey, don't forget my bones when I die. And that's like this massive act of faith. It's so weird because he's, you know, the way it's sketched out here is that he's looking forward to the Exodus. But, I mean, Joseph is in this, like, this place of high privilege, right? I mean, he's like at the top of the chain, and he's he dies in wealth. But his act as he dies is to say, don't get too comfortable here. And before you leave, dig up my bones.
Yeah.
That's like as an act of faith. I mean, that's a really interesting thing that it's sort of like, it is sort of looking forward, but he doesn't know what to look forward to or what it's supposed to look like.
Right.
And it's more sort of like a way of passing on what to expect and to sort of help the people that come after him continue to live out that life of faith.
Yeah. One of the commentators I was reading was saying that one of the things we tend to miss about this text is that when we hear it's the assurance about what we do not see, we tend to think, well, this is about God, so it means like what I don't see is in like there's this kind of invisible realm. But really, in the context of all these stories, they are not, the assurance of what they don't see has to do with a promise that is being fulfilled in the future. So the invisibility of it is not because it's like in a mystical realm, but because it's literally in the future. It's a historical reality that God is promising. But they can't see it because they're literally just living too early, you know? Like, so we tend to think, you know, faith is like what I believe about. I think that's where we get the idea that faith is just kind of like what I believe about sort of the divine realm or whatever. Or like who inhabits it, what's his name, what's he like, that kind of thing. But in the context of this, it's people who are risking, you know, their present for a future that has not yet come, and that they might not even see in this life, which is like the ultimate act of faith. It's one thing to act in faith if you were pretty reasonably sure that like you're going to get to see the reward of it. But if you're acting in faith, I think about, I don't know, there's people like in situations where they're doing something and that like they might even die, but like it's for their kids. And that's like a deeper act of faith because they're not necessarily going to see it themselves, but it's like to make a change that's going to impact, you know, someone after them. And I think that like when we talk about Abraham or someone like this, it's not like they had a expectation of the resurrection. So it was the ultimate act of faith because they weren't like, oh, it'll be cool, God will bring me back someday. They didn't even know about that. So we got some more comments here. Do we want to take the mic over there? Thank you. I really love all this discussion, by the way, you all. It keeps me from just babbling on. So you all have found a good strategy to keep me from talking too much, and I appreciate it. Thank you, Deacon Jim.
We'll have to pass this on to David.
Oh, yeah.
You know, and not jumping ahead, but, you know, Hebrews 12, the first verse in Hebrews 12 says, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witness, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles us, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. And I read this, you know, after reading Hebrews 11, and I read this, and you know, I'm one who makes the Bible very personal because it's got to be for me. And when I read this and I think about my walk with the Lord, and I think about the cloud of witness that I'm surrounded by. You know, I didn't come to Christ until I was 38 years old, and I'm 63 now. So the cloud of witness that I was surrounded by, I didn't know anything about the Bible. I didn't know anything about Moses and all those people, but I had a cloud of witness around me. I had Marcia and the saints that over and over showed a witness of what God can and will do. And that is what built my faith. And now I understand the cloud of witness that they're talking about. And I don't know these people in the Bible. I've never met them personally. But, you know, I relate it to that. So when we talk about that faith that would take you where no man has ever gone before, if I can put it that way, you know, that kind of faith. And when I look at, you know, the older saints, and you're still going, and you're still battling, and you're still, you know, standing in the gap, that's my cloud of witness, and that spurs my faith. That's the faith that I stand on, because I'm like, man, if they can do it, you know, this God, he's real, you know.
Amen. That's so good. And like, that's important to keep in mind that like, yeah, that cloud of witnesses is like the faith that is spurred on by seeing faith lived out in a person's life, not through like an argument, not through like some kind of, it's not just like an idea or something. Like, you've seen it embodied. And I think that's why the author of Hebrews says, you know, don't neglect meeting together. Like, that's why the goal that the author of Hebrews wants these people to, like, for winning for the author of Hebrews is that this community of people would dig in and entrench themselves together, and that they would commit together to following Jesus. Because I think the author of Hebrews knows, just like the Apostle Paul, just like Jesus, that the way that the gospel like commends itself to people in the world is through a community living out faith together. It's not through like one person's arguments or one person's just like sitting alone and praying by themselves, but it's about people seeing God through the actions of his people. And so, like, through our love and compassion, through our care for our neighborhood, through everything that we do. And so that's why faith has to take the form of being a community of people. It can't just exist in my mind or my heart like by itself. It has to take this like material form in the world. Just like when God wanted to save us, God had to take material form in the world, right? In Jesus. So it carries on that principle of incarnation. Oh man. All right, let's move on a little bit. Here we have these two at the bottom here are my favorite little paraphrases. N.T. Wright says, "What then is faith? It's what gives assurance to our hopes. It's what gives us convictions about things that we can't see." And then Clarence Jordan says, "Faith is turning dreams into deeds. It's betting your life on the unseen realities." I love that one. And what a guy. You know, he really did that. We talked about this already. We talked about that. So we talked a little bit about trying to fill out our understanding of the word faith by adding words like trust, loyalty, fidelity, allegiance. These all exist within what's called the lexical range of the word faith. The word faith being pistis. There it is. And so these words involve that kind of embodied and concrete action part. So it gets us away from the idea of faith as just like assent to an idea. Like my faith, well, we're going to talk about this right now, actually. But the other thing that we want to talk about tonight is that faith is not something just that we do, right? If we really want to understand faith, I think we have to start with God, because God is the source of faith, which means that God has modeled what faith looks like. God has faith too, something that you might not hear. And if you think that faith is like believing in God in your mind, then it's like, oh, so you're saying God believes in God's mind? Like this kind of, when we talk about God exercising or keeping faith, I think it's really a thing that stretches our bad understandings of faith. Because our usual understanding of faith is probably something that only humans could do, but God couldn't do. It would be silly to be like, God, do you believe that God exists? But God is constantly said in the Bible to have faith in us, to have faith, to be faithful to a plan that God had told us about, right? To be faithful to God's own character. So faith involves, the word faith includes the idea of faithfulness or trust or loyalty or allegiance, you know? So he says faith in Hebrews is a moral quality of firmness, fidelity, and reliability. And it's first and foremost an attribute of God who keeps faith with his people. What's up? Oh. Let's see if I can move that out of the way for you. There you go. They had this thing on the screen, don't worry. Okay, so yeah. So first and foremost, faith is like an attribute that God has. God keeps faith. God is trustworthy, right? Like God keeps faith. I feel like that's a phrase we don't talk about a lot, like keeping faith. But that falls in there. English is weird, so we don't have like a verb form for the word faith. So we just throw the word believe in there. And there's like a whole long... The reason why that is goes all the way back to the Normans and the Saxons and how English developed as a language. Whoops. And I don't want to go into that. But all that to say, there's a noun form for faith, but there's not a verb. Sorry, I got to go back to all these. Okay, there we go. And so when we say like, what does it mean? There's no word like to faith. So we usually say like to believe. And that puts faith all completely in our minds. It takes it out of the real world and it puts it into kind of like this abstract world of what we believe in our heads. And that's why we need to understand the Bible means something deeper and more full than what we think of when we hear the word faith. So we're going to talk about what it means for God to have faith. So we just looked at these three: Hebrews 10:23, 1 Corinthians 1:9. These are examples of the Bible describing God's faith. So it says, "Let us hold on to the confession of our hope without wavering, because the one who has made the promise is reliable." And the word reliable there is the word that we usually translate as faith. God is faithful. It's the same word that when it says that by faith, the people did this and that. 1 Corinthians 1:9 says God is faithful, and you were called by him to partnership with his son. So there we have faith, and what is the response to faith? Is his partnership with the son, or allegiance to the son, joining in the project that he's doing in the world. And then I like in Hebrews 10 here, it connects the idea of faith with the promise that God makes, and then holding on to our confession of that promise. Let's look at some other ones. It says, this is in Hebrews 13, I think. It says, "Fix your eyes on Jesus, who is the pioneer and perfecter of faith." So it's like Jesus went before us in having the faith that we're supposed to demonstrate. So if we look at Jesus' life, we'll see a life perfectly devoted to the kind of faith that we're supposed to have. And he perfected it. He expressed it in a way that couldn't be expressed better. So God has faith. God is committed to it should say to us, but it says in us. But I guess that's also true. So like I said, God having or keeping faith doesn't mean God believes that God exists. It has to mean something more than that. But here's another connection, right? So over 250 times in the Hebrew Scriptures, God is said to have this characteristic called chesed, which sometimes gets translated as steadfast love, unfailing love, loving kindness, goodness, and mercy. There's probably more. But this word, chesed, which is sometimes just translated as love, but basically a lot of biblical scholars would say that this word really means covenant faithfulness. And so that's another great word for faith. So the covenant is like the relationship that God has established, and faithfulness is obviously like loyalty to that relationship. And it's a relationship with a group of people, but covenant faithfulness is an attribute of God, and it's something that over 200 times it says that this is God's character. So whatever our understanding of faith is, we have to see that its origin is in the character of God, like faithfulness. And so we're going to look at a couple of examples of this. And I want to argue that this word that we see in Hebrew basically would be a good parallel to the pistis word in Greek. Like there's kind of an overlap there, especially when we're talking about God. So let's look at some examples of this. Here we go. The mountains may shift and the hills may be shaken, but my faithful love, which is how they translate hesed here, won't shift from you, and my covenant of peace won't be shaken, says the Lord, the one who pities you. So here we see like everything could be going crazy, but God's covenant faithfulness, the faith that God has to carry out what he plans to do, won't shift away from you. God's not going to turn his back on you, even if everything is shifting. The mountains, like there's nothing more stable than a mountain, right? And if the mountains are shaking, you're like, uh-oh, like anything could happen. That's like usually a pretty bad sign. Here's Exodus 34. This is when God is like, I'm going to show you what I'm really like. I'm gonna show you my face. Well, not my face. He's like, I can't show you my face because you wouldn't be able to handle that. But I'm going to let my goodness pass by you. You're going to see the back of my goodness. You're just going to see a little tiny bit. But when that happens, God declares God's name for the first time in the Bible, like the personal name. It's written the Lord. But it says, the Lord, the compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness. That word right there is hesed, is covenant faithfulness. He says he's abounding in faith for us. I think that's pretty cool. So here's a question for you all. How does your understanding of faith change now that you've seen how the Bible describes faith first as God's acting in faith towards us? So it's not just that faith is a response that we have to God, but faith is something first shown to us by God. God has faith in us. Like, God is committed to us so much, that God does everything God does, right? That we see in the Scripture. Be out of God's faithfulness to us. Like, how does that change your understanding of what faith is? And we probably maybe don't have time for a whole table discussion, but if anybody wants to share, or if you want to share with your neighbor, please do. And go ahead. Kick us off, Grandpa Dave.
Yeah, here's a quick experiment. Basically, if you take that expression, keeping faith,
yeah,
and if you just do that with all the verses you know about faith,
yeah,
by keeping faith, you're saved.
Yeah,
the just shall live by keeping faith.
Yeah,
I just change it all to a verb form every time. I just started doing that in my head. It's amazing how that changes my sense of all those verses about faith that I have memorized as a kid. If you change it over to a verb form, so that it's an action word and not just a thinking word.
Yep.
Put it that way.
Yeah, I really like that. Keeping faith. Jim, Pastor Phil's got one in the back if you want to bring that to him. Oh, sure. That's acceptable.
Pastor, are you suggesting that so in response to this question, that our response of faith to God is similar in our understanding of his acting in faith toward us? That those two things, the way that we act in faith toward God is similar to how he acts in faith toward us? Because that would really open up a lot of things in my thinking about how to answer that question. Pretty significant.
So Pastor Phil asked, for those on the stream, is faith kind of like mimicking the faith that God initially shows to us, or the faithfulness or the keeping of faith that God shows to us? I think so, but like asymmetrically, right? Like it's not like we can keep faith in the same way that God does, because our agency is very limited. But I think there's like there's like a connection between them, even though we can never do anything like God in the same way, even though we're made in the image of God, right? So there's like a connection, but then there's also a difference. Non-identical imitation. But yeah, I think so. The same way that God is calling us to steadfast love and faithfulness, God's not going to ask us to do something that he hasn't modeled first. That God never says like, do as I say, not as I do. Because the goal of our life is to become like God. And so God is not forming us into an image that's different from what he is like. All the things that God asks us to live into are the way that leads to life, because God himself is life itself. And so anything that God would never ask us to do something that, would lead us towards the path of death, because that's the path away from God, So I would say in general, yes. Like everything that God asks us to do is always going to be modeled and demonstrated by God first. Do you have some implications of that you want to unpack? Because it sounded like you were going somewhere with that.
I can't just ask a question.
Oh, okay. Like, I get no respect around here. Come on. Oh, yeah, of course. Okay, so, look. Our faith is the correct response to God's faithfulness, especially as allegiance to King Jesus, who is the author and high priest of a new covenant. And so faith keeps coming in contact with the concept of covenant too, because covenant is like the structure of a relationship with God. And so one of the huge themes in Hebrews is that Jesus has initiated the new covenant. And so just like the old covenant, it called for a response from the people. God is like, I'm making a promise to be with you, and faith in that context is to reciprocate and to act in faith towards the God who's promised himself to us. And so in the same way, in the new covenant, God is like extending himself to us. He's like, I've come in human form to take on human flesh, to experience everything that you've ever experienced, to be in solidarity with all your suffering, even unto death, and to come out the other side, and to be kind of the pathway to this new way of life. And so now what's the response? We call that response faith. But what it means is not just believing that Jesus did those things, but it's acting in faith, keeping faith as like a response to this act. Go ahead, yes. If you want to grab the mic, but if not, you don't have to get up,
I thought it was good.
Thank you very much. I got you. Thank you. So something that I'm just reflecting on as you're speaking about this is, having faith in, that the sun is going to rise tomorrow, or that it's not going to rain, or, Noah and the flood and everything like that. Those are having faith in things that are forces that are greater than us. But then if God is having faith in us as people, I think that can be the hardest demonstration of our faith, is if I can have faith in my fellow person, having faith in humanity, because I have to then have faith that there is a force that's greater than me, that's acting through these individuals.
Great point.
Yeah.
That can be really hard to do sometimes. So, okay, here's another little quotation. Hebrews does not use faith to denote the content of Christian belief. And we've seen this in a couple of these passages, but it's denoted by the word confession. So it says, hold fast to our confession. That's like the ideas or the concepts that we believe in, right? So we'll see that here, right? So, therefore, brothers and sisters who are partners in the heavenly calling, think about Jesus, the apostle and high priest of our confession. So that's what we tend to think of as faith, like the confession of our faith. See, even there, the confession of our faith. Jesus was faithful, there's that word again, to the one who appointed him, just like Moses was faithful in all God's house. Also, let's hold on to the confession, since we have a great high priest. Let us hold on to the confession of our hope without wavering, because the one who made the promises has faith. It is reliable. That's the word faith there again. The one who made the promises keeps faith. So the confession and faith are connected, but they're not the exact same thing. And so that's why I want to say this. Biblical faith is in, or keeping faith to, God. Our faith is not in our beliefs about God. We don't put our faith in like my beliefs about God are airtight true, right? Our faith is directed to God's ability to keep faith, like our trust in God's faith, I guess you could say. But it's not in what we think of as faith is usually our ideas about God. So what the point is, like, in the Bible, when it talks about having faith, it doesn't mean like trusting your opinions about God, you know? It's actually like directing your faith towards God in obedience. So I just want to ask, like, why is this an important distinction to make? What happens when we put our trust in the rightness of our beliefs about God instead of putting our trust in God himself, you know? Any thoughts? I'll give you a second.
Where does it say in the Bible that, I forget it, I can't quote it exactly, but if you show me your faith by your words, I will show you my faith by my actions.
Oh, yeah, that's James, I believe.
Yeah.
Right.
But if we really believe something, if I believe I can cross the Red Sea and not drown, I will do it. But you say, oh, yeah, I believe, but you guys go first, and then you...
You first, please. Yeah, well, and that's a great... faith isn't just like being really certain in some kind of unprovable belief that you might have. I might have a lot of faith that I can fly, but like, no matter how much faith I have that I can fly, it's not going to make me be able to fly. That's what sometimes I think people say faith is the the evidence of things unseen. It's the, I think sometimes people think it means like, if I really believe super hard in anything, then it'll come true. That's why we were saying, like, how is faith different than the secret? We said that a couple weeks ago. You have the mic?
I do have the mic.
Go for it.
I was thinking about the fact that as we grow and change and mature and just like have life experiences generally, our beliefs about God may change, especially if we have been taught things about God that may or may not be true or may not be helpful. And then we grow and change, and those beliefs, like literally we change what we believe about God as we grow closer to God, or as we just understand the world in different ways. And a lot of that has to do with faith. Could be deconstructing, or could just be like changing in new ways. And I think if our faith is in those beliefs, then it becomes very like uncertain and dangerous territory that can just totally wreck our whole relationship with God.
Yep.
But if we have faith actually in God, then it's okay if those beliefs change and grow over time.
Wow. Exactly. I couldn't say it better. That was exactly what I was trying to get out of this question. Amen. So think about this. Like, sorry, I'll let you go, Grandpa Dave, in a second. But I just want to say, like, yeah, if our faith is in our beliefs about God, then growing in our understanding of God, who by definition we do not understand correctly, right? Like, none of us do. God is a mystery by definition. God can't be put into human language adequately. And so if our ideas about God can become an idol that actually gets in the way of our relationship with God and our faith in God. And so I see this all the time. Like, people who are very convinced that their ideas about God, that their faith is in those ideas, any new way of thinking about God is a threat. Any growth in your understanding about God you see as a threat to your faith, because it's changing this kind of like perfect sort of mind palace of like correct doctrines that you've constructed for yourself, and it becomes your faith becomes incredibly brittle, and it's really, honestly, really dangerous. And I think what we see there's like an entire generation of people, I think, that burned out on that way of doing faith. And I think a lot of them are my age. And they heard that, well, if you challenge any one of these questions about God, then you're going against God himself. And they're like, well, I can't believe this stuff anymore, so I guess I can't be a Christian. Because they had equated faith with those certain particular kind of like evangelical beliefs about God, a lot of people were like, well, if it's between that and like, and I don't know, if I have to hold on to every single one of these or not become a Christian, I guess I'll not be a Christian anymore. But if our faith is in God and not our ideas about God, then our beliefs can change and grow without it being a challenge to our faith, because our faith is in God and not in like a certain just sort of fixed set of doctrines. So I hope that makes sense. Go ahead, Grandpa Dave.
Yeah, well, you just said most of what I was going to say. I would just add one piece to that, which is I think that trust in the really rightness of our beliefs, and even more than our beliefs, it's how we articulate them, how we say them. You have to say it exactly right. That's a recipe for fear, to be afraid all the time. And then so we look for really strong authority people that can say it exactly right and try to copy their words so that we've got it right. In the meantime, God is actually lost to us. We're not in touch with God at all. We're in touch with ideas about God and about saying it the right way. My job was for many years was to work with words a lot in a couple of languages, and getting it right became more important to me than knowing what was the right thing to do. After a while, not doing was less important than how it was all said. That was a recipe for a spiral into just craziness and depression. So it's the fearfulness that comes with that is what.
Yeah.
I just feel like there's a real warning about that.
Yeah. We create a box and then we just demand that God stays in it. And if God is calling us out of that box, then we're like, well, that must be the voice of the enemy, Yeah. Pastor Phil, go ahead.
Jim, those are medical grade bleach wipes. I'm not sure you're supposed to use your bare hands for those, but anyway, that's just one point. Second point.
Do your hands hurt right now? Are they burning?
Yeah, I know,
okay.
right?
Okay, good.
I'm like, your finger. You may not have your fingerprints after tonight.
Keeps making
Jim.
this sizzling sound whenever I touch them. I don't know. Is that weird? Is that bad?
Oh, good. Yeah, I was just thinking one of the ways that this plays out, I feel like, is that we have these beliefs about, in our relationship with God, we have these beliefs about how He's going to act in a manner that would be favorable toward us often. And so we have this belief about how He's going to what He's going to do. And when He perhaps doesn't do that thing, He doesn't act in a way you thought He was going to, sometimes we become very disappointed. And I think about what you're saying, Pastor Erik, and I'm thinking, gosh, I'm not sure that our faith. Well, let me say it this way: Are you disappointed because God didn't do what you believed He was going to do? Or are you disappointed because you believe that God is no longer committed to His relationship with you? Because I don't think it's the latter. I think it's the former. I think we're saying, I am disappointed that God did not do what I believed He was going to do. So this is like to your question that's in front of us, which is that my faith, I think, in those moments is not really in God. It's in my belief about something God was going to do or not going to do. I believed He was going to act in a way. And so my faith was in my belief about Him, not so much in Him. And I think that's such an important distinction, because I never believe that God has, this is these are His words, right? I will never leave you nor forsake you. Right? I never believe that He has withdrawn His commitment to His relationship with me. I just realize that He is not acting the way I believed He was going to act. And that can, for some people, be a point of serious disappointment.
Yeah.
And I think that's why this is so important, because really you're saying what the Bible is inviting us into, what God's inviting us into, is to just remain committed in my relationship to Him. It's not remain committed if He acts in a way I believed He was going to act.
Yeah.
And I think that's so important, and it helps me understand my faith better, because I'm like, okay, God, you want me to just remain steadfast in my covenant relationship with you. Like that's what faith looks like for me. And so I appreciated so much this distinction tonight. Thank you.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. When I think, okay, so like at the end of Hebrews 11, it's talking about people conquering kingdoms and administering justice and quenching the fury of flames. That sounds great. And then it's like, some faced jeers and floggings and chains and imprisonment. They were put to death by stoning. They were sawn in two. So it's like that's an outcome of faith too. So it doesn't just mean like if you have faith, nothing bad is going to happen. But like in this context, faith is the thing that's allowing people to do the right thing, even if it is going to cost them being sawn in two. And so faith is more of like, it's more about a commitment to this like ultimate good that you believe is worth your life more than it is about like a calculation about how to get sort of a little bit more than you might without faith. If it's just like a calculation to get the best deal, well, I mean, it is a good deal. I mean, I think faith changes the way you see that calculation. But yeah, so this is great. I think we're gonna finish. We went over time, so I apologize. Let me pray for us, and then we're gonna get out of here. So let's pray. Hit that. All right, Lord. We just ask that you would, just like the people who came to you in the Gospels, right? We believe, help our unbelief. We desire to have faith in you. We desire the desire to have faith in you. Sometimes we don't know what it really looks like, but we trust that if we follow after you, you will show us. So we're just asking that you continue to enlighten us as what it means to follow you. What does it mean to have faith? What does it mean to commit ourselves fully to what you're doing in the world? So we ask that you would continue to draw us closer as a community, Lord, and we ask that you continue to draw us deeper into this mystery of faith, knowing that you're beside us the whole time, and we'll continue following you. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, fam. It's great to be with you. Great conversation. And we'll be back here on Saturday for our worship gathering. We'll not be back here. We'll be in the park. We'll be in Dickey Park. So show up. And then next Tuesday, we'll be back here for more dinner and more Bible study. So, woo! We are, right? We're at the park? Okay. Whew. Yeah, if you could stack the chairs, maybe just put them against the wall. That would be really helpful. And talk to you later. Online family, we thank you for being with us. Here, I'll get that for you. That little button is tricky, right? I don't know, yeah.